Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide, a reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that Operation Overlord was the World War II codename for the Allied D-Day campaign, with 150,000 soldiers preparing to cross the English Channel to invade Nazi-occupied Western Europe? Learn how the Allied forces launched one of the largest military operations in history, bringing together soldiers, sailors, and airmen from many nations in a courageous fight with careful planning, teamwork, and extraordinary bravery. Discover how D-Day became a turning point in World War II and helped bring an end to Nazi rule in Europe.
You know, if you watch a master illusionist on stage, the entire trick really relies on misdirection.
Right, yeah.
Like they make a coin disappear by just getting you to look intently at their other hand.
Yeah.
This highly controlled, really localized manipulation of your attention.
Yeah.
But take that exact same concept, right, that psychological trick, and try to pull it off not with a coin, but with an entire, fully functioning, heavily armed city.
I mean, it defies all conventional logic. You're trying to make this entire mechanized metropolis completely invisible to a highly sophisticated enemy.
Yeah.
An enemy who is actively staring right at you, looking for any sign of movement.
It sounds like a, fabricated movie script, but it is the absolute factual reality of what took place in the spring of 1944. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking a comprehensive stack of military records, historical logs, and tactical accounts detailing Operation Overlord, which you probably know better as D-Day.
No.
And our mission for you today is to really dig into the sheer unprecedented scale of this. I mean, it's the largest military invasion in history. We're going to break down the elaborate psychological mind games that made it possible, the terrifying physical defenses on the beaches, and exactly how this single operation secured the end of Nazi world domination.
Because, before a single soldier even stepped out of a boat onto the sand in France, an assembly of global force, unlike anything seen before or since, was taking place just across the English Channel.
Right, because World War II is this massive clash between two global factions. You have the Axis powers, right? Germany, Italy, and Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And facing them down are the Allies. And when you actually look at the Allied roster, the coalition is staggering.
It really is.
You've got Britain, France, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, India, Soviet Union, China, and of course the United States.
And those are just the primary powers, too. I mean, the sheer logistical web extends so much further than that.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. There was absolutely vital naval, air, and ground support pouring in from a multitude of other nations. You had dedicated forces from Belgium, Czechoslovakia, the Netherlands, Greece, Norway, Poland, Rhodesia. I mean, all of them pooling their resources and intelligence and manpower.
It's just the ultimate global coalition.
Wow.
And, to really grasp the gravity of this for a second, think about coordinating a group trip with, like, 5 friends.
Right, which is impossible.
It's notoriously difficult. People are late. Nobody agrees on dinner. Now, scale that up. Think about the logistics of a modern multinational corporation trying to shift its entire global supply chain overnight. You have different departments, completely different languages.
Yeah, different operating systems.
Exactly. Now, completely remove all modern technology. There are no computers,
No.
no encrypted digital communications, no satellite tracking. You are secretly coordinating this massive military coalition across dozens of nations with completely different military doctrines, and you're relying entirely on 1940s technology.
And the numbers involved in that coordination are just difficult to even process. We are not talking about moving a few battalions here. On the initial landing day alone, this coalition moved 150,000 men.
Wait, 150,000 men in a single day?
Yes, in one day. And they obviously, they couldn't just march there.
Right.
That initial wave required this massive armada of 5,000 ships crossing the English Channel simultaneously. And above them, they mobilized a staggering 11,000 aircraft for air cover, reconnaissance, bombardment. So, calling Operation Overlord the largest air, land, and sea military operation undertaken before or since, it's not some dramatic flourish. It is a mathematical, historical fact.
And what's wild is all of this unimaginable coordination was hurtling toward a date that was completely up in the air.
Right.
Which brings up a detail that often surprises people. The very name of the operation itself, people always wonder, what does the D in D-Day actually stand for? Like departure, doomsday.
Well, it just stands for day.
Which is almost anticlimactic, honestly.
Yeah. It is, yeah. But the reason behind it is incredibly tense. The invasion was utterly, completely dependent on the weather. The planners couldn't ink a specific date into the permanent strategic record because, well, a sudden storm in the English Channel would just wash the entire operation out.
Oh, wow. So they couldn't commit.
Exactly. So D-Day was strictly used as a placeholder term by military planners to describe, whatever day the invasion would finally be able to occur.
And that weather dependency nearly derailed the entire thing. The invasion was originally slated for June 5th, but a massive storm system moved in, and they were delayed for a full 24 hours.
And keeping 150,000 men, 5,000 ships, and 11,000 aircraft a secret for an extra 24 hours while they just sit fully loaded in these staging areas, that's nearly impossible.
Right, which perfectly explains the strategic pivot the Allies had to make. Because this massive force was, well, it was way too big to truly hide, they realized they couldn't conceal that they were attacking.
Yeah, you can't hide something that big.
A force that size generates its own gravity, basically.
Yeah.
So the only option was to lie about where they were attacking.
And that leads directly to the psychological warfare that ran parallel to the physical preparations. The Allies needed the German high command to definitively believe the invasion was going to strike at Pas-de-Calais.
Because geographically, Pas-de-Calais is just the most logical choice in the world. It's the narrowest point between Great Britain and France.
Right.
And if you're commanding an army, and you need to move a massive amount of heavy armor and infantry across a notoriously unpredictable body of water, you take the shortest possible route.
It's the most obvious military target. And the Allies weaponized that exact assumption. They launched these massive, highly coordinated decoy movements to sell this illusion. U.S. General George Patton, who was, one of the most famous and feared commanders in the Allied forces, he was actually placed in charge of a completely fake operation based in Great Britain.
Right.
They deployed pretend U.S. Army troops and built entirely fabricated equipment.
Okay, but wait. How does that actually work in practice? Because if you're the Germans, you have aerial scouts, right?
Right.
They have reconnaissance planes flying over England constantly, taking photographs of the ground. How do you pull off hiding 5,000 real ships in one place while simultaneously making fake, pretend equipment look threatening enough to fool an entire military intelligence apparatus?
That is the mechanical genius of Patton's decoy operation. They didn't just build a few wooden signs. They utilized inflatable rubber tanks.
Rubber tanks? That's incredible.
Yeah. They constructed incredibly convincing airplanes out of canvas and wood, and they even generated massive amounts of fake radio traffic. They were broadcasting fabricated troop movements and logistical orders out into the ether, knowing full well the Germans were listening.
So they're creating a completely manufactured digital, radio footprint to back up the physical illusions on the ground.
Exactly. It was an absolute masterclass in exploiting confirmation bias. Think about it. When a German reconnaissance plane flies at high altitude over England, and the pilot sees the shapes of tanks and encampments massing opposite Pas-de-Calais, their brain just fills in the rest of the details.
Oh, I see.
The German command already expects the attack to come from there because it is the narrowest crossing. The Allies simply handed them the visual confirmation they were already desperately looking for.
They gave the enemy exactly what they expected to see.
Precisely. By making the most obvious target look like the real one, this psychological warfare bought precious, indispensable time for the actual physical landing to take place down the coast at Normandy.
But, that illusion in England only really matters if you can survive the horrific physical reality waiting for you in France. Because while Patton was building an army out of rubber and air, the Germans were busy building a literal fortress out of concrete and steel.
Yeah, the immovable object waiting for the Allied forces was the Atlantic Wall. Adolf Hitler charged German General Erwin Rommel with constructing this defense system, and the sheer scale and lethality of it are just terrifying.
I mean, we're talking about a 2,400-mile fortified coastline. That wall extended all the way along the northern coast of France, stretching through Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, and all the way up through Norway.
It's massive.
2,400 miles of unbroken hostility.
And Rommel fortified this enormous stretch of land with an impenetrable barrier of destruction. He embedded the coastline with hidden, reinforced concrete bunkers, extensive and overlapping minefields, and millions of landmines just buried in the sand.
And the lethal engineering extended well past the sand, too. The water itself was heavily booby-trapped.
Right.
They installed these massive steel structures that were 6 to 10 feet high, planted firmly right in the surf. And they utilized mine-tipped logs angled perfectly toward the sea.
And the specific mechanism of this strategy was brutally calculated. The Nazis purposely designed the vast majority of these offshore defenses to be submerged. They timed their strategy around the tides.
Wow.
Their goal was for unsuspecting Allied landing crafts to come ashore during high tide, sail right over the top of these obstacles, and then just be completely destroyed by unseen submerged weapons tearing through the hulls of their boats.
I mean, the claustrophobia of that scenario is overwhelming. Just imagine you're in a landing craft, you're packed shoulder to shoulder, and you're moving toward a 2,400-mile wall of explosives that are specifically engineered to rip the bottom out of your boat before you ever even catch sight of the enemy.
Exactly.
You are completely boxed in by lethal threats from the second you approach the shore.
It was an absolute gauntlet of death. And this was the nightmare that the Allied forces were staring down when the weather finally cleared and the green light was given on June 6, 1944.
Right, because U.S. General Dwight D. Eisenhower had been appointed commander of Operation Overlord in January of 1944. And as the supreme commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, he makes his final, definitive move. Just 4 days before the invasion, knowing exactly what awaits his men in the water and on the sand, he writes a letter to the troops. And the language he uses, well, it really sets the immense historical stakes of the moment.
It does. He addresses the soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, and he tells them, "You are about to embark upon the Great Crusade toward which we have striven these many months."
The Great Crusade.
He continues, stating, "The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you." He demanded absolutely nothing less than full victory and asked them to beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.
And, you know, the sweeping historical rhetoric of that letter, the Great Crusade, the eyes of the world, it stands in such a jarring, violent contrast to the visceral physical reality of what those men actually experience the second the ramps on their landing crafts dropped.
Absolutely. The contrast strips away all the polish of military history. When those boats hit the sandbanks and the heavy steel doors dropped open, the men didn't just casually walk onto a beach.
Yeah.
They had to jump into deep freezing water, swim, run, and crawl more than 200 yards just to reach the meager safety of the cliffs.
And just to put that in perspective, 200 yards is the length of 2 full football fields. The reality of running the length of 2 football fields in those conditions is a physical nightmare.
Oh, yeah.
You aren't just sprinting in gym clothes. You are carrying 80 pounds of heavy equipment on your back.
Right.
You're starting in the ocean. You're completely soaked. Your boots are filled with seawater, weighing you down with literally every step. You are completely exposed on a flat, unforgiving beach. And while you are attempting this exhausting, terrifying sprint, you are being continuously bombarded by heavy machine gun and small arms artillery fire from the bunkers above.
It was absolute chaos. Patton's deception had worked. I mean, the Germans were indeed confused by the location of the invasion, and the Allied air support provided crucial cover. But the men on the ground were fighting and bleeding for every single inch of sand.
And surviving the beach was merely the prologue.
Yeah.
Because once they made it past the sand and the cliffs, they had to fight their way inland against fiercely entrenched German resistance.
Yeah.
They were navigating through the incredibly dense marshes and those infamous hedgerows of the Normandy countryside.
And those hedgerows were formidable natural defenses. They weren't just, garden bushes.
Right.
They were ancient, thick earthen mounds intertwined with massive, impenetrable root systems. Tanks couldn't bash through them without exposing their vulnerable underbellies, meaning the infantry had to clear the countryside violently, field by brutal field.
But that unimaginable effort, that agonizing inch-by-inch fight off the beaches and through the countryside, it achieved its ultimate goal. It unlocked the entire European continent. But, as we know, that success came at a devastating immediate cost.
Yes. The initial toll of the invasion was severe. The combined Allied forces suffered nearly 10,000 injuries on D-Day alone, and there were more than 4,000 deaths.
Over 4,000 lives lost in the sand and the surf in a matter of hours. But the historical fact is those horrific losses secured the turning point in the war. By June 11th, so just 5 days after the initial landings, the massive beachheads were firmly secured.
And this is where the sheer logistics become mind-bending all over again. The operation brought 150,000 men ashore on day one, right? But by the end of June, the Allied force in Normandy had swelled to a frankly incomprehensible size. They had successfully landed 850,000 men and 150,000 vehicles.
Wow.
And all of them were actively moving across France.
Moving 150,000 heavy vehicles and nearly 1 million human beings across a hostile beach without the use of a major functional port into an occupied country in less than a month. I mean, that is a logistical miracle.
It is the defining mechanical achievement of the war. This massive, unstoppable influx of industrial and human power is exactly why this invasion definitively marked the beginning of the end of Hitler's dream of Nazi world domination. The German war machine simply could not repel a force of that magnitude once it gained a foothold.
And the timeline of victory rapidly accelerates from there. Near the end of August 1944, all of northern France was entirely liberated from Nazi control. Paris itself was liberated on August 25. And this unbroken, relentless chain of events ultimately forced Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8, 1945.
But looking past the staggering statistics, past the 5,000 ships, past the 2,400 miles of the Atlantic Wall, and even the logistical triumph of moving 850,000 men, we have to confront the underlying foundation of this entire endeavor. What was the core ideology that fueled this unprecedented global sacrifice?
Why did all these disparate nations join together in the first place? And the answer is absolute. The Allied forces joined together to fight for freedom, specifically the freedom to choose the right. This freedom is recognized as essential to both our daily and eternal lives.
Exactly. The ideological core of Operation Overlord reaches back long before the tactical planning of 1944. The historical accounts of the operation explicitly connect the motivations of the Allied forces to the words Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence.
Right, he wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness."
It is profound that a philosophical document from 1776 became the spiritual fuel for a global mechanized coalition in 1944.
It really is. And it makes you wonder, distilling a world war down to the defense of these unalienable rights, how does that completely reframe the way we view those 4,000 soldiers who never made it off the beach?
Well, it shifts the entire focus from a discussion of military strategy to a fundamental defense of human dignity.
Right.
Those men weren't just fighting to capture a tactical grid on a map or, to win a geopolitical territory dispute. They were laying down their lives to defend the objective truth that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are unalienable, meaning they're inherent rights that no dictator, no wall, and no empire has the authority to strip away.
And defending those ideals is the very foundation of what made Eisenhower's Great Crusade an absolute necessity. Freedom requires defense. The sacrifice on the beaches of Normandy is the ultimate terrible payment for the liberty that we get to experience today. We've covered immense ground in this deep dive for you.
We really have.
We started with the meticulous, impossibly complex coordination of dozens of nations pooling their resources. We examined the genius of General Patton's phantom army of inflatable tanks and fake radio chatter, perfectly exploiting the psychological assumptions of the German High Command.
And we explored the terrifying physical reality of Rommel's Atlantic Wall. 2,400 miles of submerged steel and explosives, strategically designed to shred unsuspecting ships at high tide.
Right, and we brought it down to the individual human level. The visceral horror of plunging into the freezing surf, carrying 80 pounds of soaking wet gear, and sprinting 200 yards into heavy, continuous artillery fire to secure a foothold on the continent. It is a factual reality that this immense, unparalleled sacrifice completely unraveled Adolf Hitler's vision of global domination and secured the liberties we discussed today.
It was the definitive breaking point of the Axis powers' control over Europe.
But before we wrap up, there is one final, incredibly poignant detail from the tactical history that we want to leave you with. A thought to ponder that builds on everything we've unpacked today.
Right, and it connects right back to the very name of the operation.
Precisely. We established earlier that the D in D-Day just stood for D because the entire Allied command was completely at the mercy of the weather. And that unpredictability caused a terrifying 24-hour delay, pushing the largest invasion in history from June 5 to June 6.
The greatest, most complex assembly of military power in human history was put on a razor's edge by a simple forecast of rain and wind.
Which truly forces you to consider the extreme fragility of history. Because think about it, if the storms hadn't broken on June 6, if bad weather had lingered over the English Channel for a few more days or even weeks, what would have happened?
Yeah, everything could have fallen apart.
All that unparalleled planning across dozens of Allied nations, Patton's incredibly delicate illusions in Great Britain that could have been discovered by a single stray reconnaissance plane at any moment. The 11,000 mobilized aircraft sitting fully loaded on the tarmac. I mean, all of it could have completely unraveled before a single soldier ever stepped off a boat. Leaves you wondering just how much of the world's liberty ultimately hinged on the entirely unpredictable, sheer luck of a clearing weather forecast.
It's a staggering reality to confront.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for this day in His story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in His story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.